Это Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare here. World champion, 5-time world champion. And you are getting ready to watch a career interview with the Russian Nightmare on Hannibal TV.
So we are with Nikita Koloff here, legendary NWA wrestler. He was also in WCW, among other places. He wrestled in Japan, Puerto Rico, all over the place, which he'll get into. Can you start by telling us what it was like growing up in Minnesota when you were young?
You know, I've got some pretty fond memories of the early days, and I say fond memories for those who don't know any of my story. Growing up, what I affectionately call the ghettos or the projects of Minneapolis, really the heart of Minneapolis. We were just right outside the outskirts of downtown Minneapolis. Low-income housing and welfare, and we were on welfare. My mom raised 4. I was the youngest of 4, and my dad left when I was about 3 years old, and didn't financially support the family, and so my mom, was able to get welfare. So, I said some very humble beginnings. I'm in the projects. I'm a welfare kid. Tell people I got no money, no daddy. That was kind of my humble beginnings. But yet, I look back on those beginnings with fond memories because it helped me become who I am today, and even as it parlayed me into success in life. I feel fortunate that I really started out really with nothing, and then have a greater appreciation for everything that I have attained over the years.
Now, I'm going to reference your book quite a bit in this interview, so I'll plug it right now. It is available, the Kindle version, on Amazon, and if people contact you directly, I guess they could get an autographed copy of it. They can
get it. They can get it directly from me, and also High Spots in Charlotte, North Carolina. HighSpots.com carries autographed copies of it as well. So a couple different places they can get it.
And it's a great book, and why I was bringing it up now is because you mentioned in your book that you played high school football with Barry Darsow, Curt Hennig, Tom Zink, John Nord, and even Rick Rude. Who were you closest with out of that bunch?
I would probably say out of that whole group, probably John Nord, because him and I graduated together, class of '77. Curt and Tom and Rick graduated a year ahead of us. Barry graduated a year after us. Although Barry and I were pretty good friends as well, and then obviously ended up being a wrestling tag team partner, which never in a million years would we have ever dreamed that back in our high school days playing high school football.
And football, of course, that was your passion back then. And speaking of John Nord, how is he doing now? Because the last I saw of him, I think it was an episode of Judge Judy or something, where it was kind of sad. He had lost all of his size, and somebody was suing him over something minuscule.
Well, I know he had probably car sales, the sale of a car probably. I know his brother was did well in car sales. I believe the last I heard, John had, after leaving wrestling, had gotten into car sales. That was probably what the dispute was over. Just guessing, of course. Haven't seen or talked to John in a while now, so I'm not sure. Hopefully he's doing okay, but I'm not sure.
And for anyone watching this that doesn't know, of course, he was Nord the Barbarian, but had a successful run in WWE as the Berserker. And Tom Zink, he just passed away. Do you have any memories you wanted to share about him?
Well, what's crazy is, so that whole graduating class of '76 that I just mentioned, Tom Zink, Curt Hennig, and Rick Rude, as well as Brady Boone, who graduated with that class. He wrestled as Brady Boone down in the Carolinas, and then did some refereeing, Florida, also with the NWA. All 4 of those guys are no longer living. It just kind of blows my mind. Barry Darsow and I were talking about that a while ago. But you know, Tom, and the time that he was with WCW, I don't know that I probably did have a handful of matches with him. Don't remember for sure off the top of my head. It's, you know, you kind of get thrown in the mix with all kinds of guys and combinations, tag teams, but Tom was a good hand. And thinking back to the high school days, you know, he gravitated towards bodybuilding. In fact, at one point, won a Mr. Minnesota bodybuilding contest. So he had that accolade under his belt as well, and that, I think, helped parlay him into the wrestling arena. And he seemed to have done well. He seemed to do well with Rick Martel, and I think they were the Can-Am connection.
Yeah.
And then seemed to do okay with WCW.
And Rick Rude has that tough guy reputation. Did that start back in high school?
It did. Probably the memory that jumps out the most for me, it was really kind of a crazy scene. It was hockey. In fact, Barry Darsow played on the high school hockey team. We used to go to the games, and we were playing Edina, Minnesota, which always had if they didn't win the state championship, they seemed to always be in the state championship game. And we'd had a game against them, home game. They won, crushed our school, Robbinsdale. And the most bizarre thing happened after the game, and Rick was kind of the instigator of it. Fights broke out with the Edina hockey players. Now, all of our players were already on the school bus, but they were hanging out the windows and kind of cheering things on. And I'll never forget, Rick was on top of the starting goalie and just pummeling this guy. And I could still see a picture in my mind. The goalie still had like his goalie stick in his hand, trying to hit Rick, and you know, I snatched the goalie stick so Rick wouldn't get hurt. But that is just a memory that sticks out of my mind about Rick Rude. He was a scrapper going way back, and his dad too. A little side note, was a Golden Gloves boxer.
Okay.
And so from what I remember Rick telling me and the stories I've told, his dad put it to him a few times, and that kind of toughened Rick up as well.
Now, you didn't go into a D1 school. Was that just because of grades?
Yeah, you know, for some reason in my head, I had the belief that my athletic ability would get me into a major college, not thinking I had to actually apply myself scholastically and get good grades. And I didn't figure that out actually until my senior year in high school, when I finally buckled down, but then kind of too little too late. And so I wasn't recruited by any major colleges, recruited by a lot of colleges, just no major colleges. So I actually went to a junior college first, because the defensive head coach was actually my very first football coach ever, Bill Burke, and in 7th grade. And he was now the defensive head coach, or head of the defense, and then several of the coaches at that junior college had been former Robbinsdale high school coaches, so I was already familiar with all of them, and Coach Burke really wanted me to come over there, and so I did. So I started there, but a lot of that had to do with grades, and then of course I parlayed that from there into a 4-year college, a D2 school.
And you had one incident, I guess, where you got temporarily expelled for punching the dean's son.
Well, I didn't actually punch the dean's son. Now, that's a true story. I didn't actually punch him. It was interesting, the school we were at. The school we were at, ironically, was a Bible college. And I tell people I didn't go there to learn about Jesus. I went there because they were the #1 junior college football team in the nation. And so they had a stellar football program. And the academic dean's son and I just never really saw eye to eye. And I just happened to be in the dorms one night. He happened to cross me the wrong way, say the wrong thing. I did a stormtrooper stomp over, and actually literally open hand slapped him. His glasses went flying. He flipped over backwards out of his chair. So he wasn't hurt in any major way. Guess I was getting ready for wrestling without even knowing it. But he of course, obviously told his dad, and then I was expelled from the college.
And at one point, you actually recruited Road Warrior Animal, who we've also done an interview with, to play at your college. It didn't ultimately work out too well, but you guys go back a long way, I guess.
We do. Joe and I go way back. I mean, I remember, and I remember. See, I fractured my leg my freshman year, my tibia, my fibula, and was rehabilitating that. We started having some coaching changes. I started doing a lot of the recruiting that off season, and I remember reaching out, looking in newspapers, and I saw Joe's name, and had him and his parents. I can still remember showing them around campus, giving them the whole tour, and convincing and end up talking Joe into coming to school there. And so we were able to play 2 years together there at the junior college, and then eventually encouraged him to come up to Morehead State University with me, and he did. But then he ended up dropping out because he got his girlfriend at the time pregnant, and went off and quit football and got a job. So.
And you eventually ended up bouncing with him as well, I guess.
We did. We did do some of that. He and I were. We really became like a prodigal son to his mom and dad. His mom fell in love with me, Lorna. His dad not so much. His dad didn't really love any of us. You know, we would we called them all the muscle heads from the gym, right? We'd go over to Joe's house. Joe had a pool, so his dad would be off working. We'd all go over there, work out, go over to the house, and just hang out in the pool, and you know, just be crazy. And his dad come home. His dad be so mad because there'd be 15, 20. We'd eat and drink everything in the house, and so yeah, they embraced me. In fact, one year, true story. One year, his mom bought me more Christmas presents than she bought any of the other three boys. And I remember they're like, "Mom, what's up with that?" I mean, they were mad, but Lorna just fell in love with me and took me in as one of her own. It was pretty amazing.
Is that why John Laurinaitis never brought you to make any appearances for WWE?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe John's always had that against me. I'm like, come on, dude, like really? But yeah, maybe, I don't know.
You trained at Jesse Ventura's gym. Did you have much contact with him when you were working out there?
Yeah, he was front desk every day. I mean, he was always there, you know. And here's Jesse. You walk in, he'd be sitting at the front desk and always moving, always rocking. You know, hey, what's up? You know, and it was interesting because that was in our junior college days, and Joel went over there with me, and a lot of the guys from the junior college, and then of course other friends and weightlifters. And that was my first exposure. I mean, I say my first exposure to professional wrestling. I'd see it on TV, the AWA, just kind of surfing through the channels on the weekend. You know, watch a little bit of it, but really didn't so much pique my interest. And then when we met Jesse, we really got to know Jesse actually at that time, and he invited us down to the St. Paul Civic Center. That was my first live professional wrestling match. He was doing a deadlift thing against Precious Paul Ellering, and that was quite an eye-opening experience that night for sure. But and Jesse what was fun was we go, hey Jesse, you should say this on your interviews or whatever, and then every now and then we might catch one, and he'd actually say something we suggested, and so that was kind of fun.
So he was working at the gym almost daily and then doing the wrestling at night?
Yeah. Well, in the AWA territory, you know, it wasn't like how it was for me in the NWA. I mean, we wrestled every night. I mean, 1986, put it in perspective, I had 454 matches in 1986. Now, there's only 365 days in a year, so you can do the math on that. The AWA only worked my understanding, about half the month. So they might do, you know, 2-3 shows here, or, you know, 3 or 4 shows there, or one show, a spot show. And a lot of them were kind of local. Sometimes it might be Rochester, it might be a day trip up to Winnipeg and back, or so he had a lot of time that he could spend at the gym.
And eventually Joe got into wrestling, I guess through his bouncing. He met someone to train him. And he brought you up to Georgia when you were off from football, and you stayed with Jake Roberts for a while and hung out at the matches, I guess.
Yeah, so Joe and a bunch of them, met Eddie Sharkey and started going to a camp. Eddie put a little camp together, and they were going to this camp with Eddie Sharkey. I think Kurt was part of that. Rick, Joe, Barry. Forget who all was involved.
Hawk, I think he must have been involved in that.
Yeah, yeah. And several other guys, after they kind of hit stardom, Wayne Bloom, Mike Enos, and others started going there as well, or having Eddie train them. And Grandma B's, I believe. Now, I didn't work at Grandma B's, but that was the bar that all these guys were bouncing at. And that's where I think Eddie was bartending there, actually. And conversations were just struck up, and one thing led to another, and Eddie put this camp together. And then Eddie ended up calling Ole Anderson, who came up from Georgia Championship Wrestling, and met Joe and a couple of the guys, and that was before there was the Road Warrior tag team. Joe was just a singles wrestler and had a whole different kind of a jean outfit and biker, sunglasses. It was different. But and then so it was just interesting how all those guys really kind of broke in and got started. It was pretty interesting.
So what enticed you to go out there and live with Joe before he actually invited you to wrestle? So
my freshman year of college, I fractured my right leg. I rehabilitated, came back, was determined to come back and did, and played 3 more years of college football. My senior year, I was being scouted by the NFL, and my childhood dream was to play in the NFL. And so I was determined to do that. So even though I fractured that leg, I'd already come back from 1 fractured leg, so I was convinced I could do it again. And so I moved back to Minneapolis, training at the gym. I trained for about 1.5 years. And that's where I did the bouncing, because I wanted to be able to have really kind of the bulk of the day to be able to be in the gym. So I was several hours a day, every day, and so to be able to make some cash at night bouncing seemed like kind of a natural or a given. That's where Almo and I were bouncing together. It's kind of crazy days. I can remember it kind of took a page out of Ventura's book. We had bandanas, and Joe and I went and got feathered earrings like Ventura. It was crazy. And then, he and I worked the front door. He was 300 and I was 285, and that's what you saw when you walked through the front door. 2 guys with bandanas, feathered earrings, and pumped to the gills. And so when Joe got into wrestling, I wished him well. I continued on the path of training for pro football. And then he just kept calling me. He's like, dude, come on down. You can train down here, and you can stay with us for a while. He was living with Jake the Snake Roberts and in an apartment over by Stone Mountain, Georgia. And so I did. I went down. Actually, I remember I left Minneapolis on New Year's Eve. And I stopped in Indianapolis, and that's where I spent New Year's Eve, in Indianapolis in a hotel room. Got up the next morning, New Year's Day, rolled into Atlanta, and I was there for about maybe just a little over 2 months, and I would go to the shows with them, like if they were local in Georgia, like they'd go down to Columbus, Georgia, or Marietta or wherever. I'd ride with them. It would be usually Jake and Joe and Paul Ellering. Now Hawk was there, but he'd ride with other people. And so I'd ride to the towns, just kind of hang out in the back, meet some of the guys. Still never really thought much of it. They'd go up to Ohio and Michigan on week-long tours, and then I'd have the whole place to myself. It was great. And I just looked at it as, just a mindset. I'm training for professional football. And then in March of that year, March of 1984, I said, hey, dude, I'm going to head back to Minneapolis. Been fun, but, I got to get back and kind of get geared up for this football. And so I did. And then in April, so only a month later, that's when I got the phone call from Joe about the idea of becoming a Russian Chitoita.
Do you have any stories about Jake the Snake from that time? Because he's a kind of wacky character.
Yeah, I do. Jake would get so mad at me. Jake was, I don't know, he's still, back in those days, he was a chain smoker. And of course, I'm like, I couldn't stand cigarette smoke. And but I'm living with these guys, and he's a chain smoker. And so I'm like, okay, I got to figure something out here. Every time they'd go on their tours to Ohio, go up north, Ohio, Michigan, whatever, I'd throw all of his ashtrays out. I'd get rid of everything. I'd fumigate the apartment, do the whole deal. He'd come home and be looking, you know, he's like looking everywhere for his ashtrays, and they disappeared, you know. And it never became a real point. We never got in any kind of contention over it. But he certainly was never pleased about my doing that. But that was one crazy kind of thing that I did. It kind of drove him crazy.
Now you mentioned Joe gave you the call that you could possibly be used as this Russian character. Do you want to tell us what your initial contact was like with the office there?
Yeah, so you know, and I still remember it's like 9 o'clock one morning, you know, and I get this call from Joe, and I still remember he goes, you know, we're just kind of small talking. He goes, so, well, what do you think about wrestling? And I'm like, I think you're doing great, man, you know. And he's like, no, what do you think about wrestling? I'm like you mean like me actually wrestle? You know, I'm like, what are we gonna be? The Third Road Warrior? What, you know? He's like, no, dude. There's these guys in the Carolinas, Don Kernodle, Ivan Koloff, and Don approached me and asked me this question: do you know any big guys who wouldn't mind shaving their head and becoming a Russian? And Joe goes, Matt. He goes, I know the guy right now. Let me call him. And so he told me the whole storyline, you know, and it couldn't have really, looking back, the timing couldn't have been any more perfect. 1984, they figured the Russians would boycott the games in Los Angeles, the Olympic Games, because the Americans boycotted the games in Moscow in 1980, and they wanted some new blood, so to speak, so a young guy to kind of bolster Ivan's career and extend his career, you know, further. And so they could find somebody that would fit that bill, that's what they were hopeful. So I said, well, what would I have to do? He goes, well, call this promoter in Charlotte. His name's Jim Crockett. I go, Joe, do they know I have no amateur wrestling background and no professional training, right? I mean, they know that, right? He's, yeah. He goes, I told them, and they said they didn't care. I'm like, all right. So he gave me the number. I called the office. Jim Crockett got on the phone. I'm Mr. Crockett. Joe Laurinaitis gave me your phone number, blah, blah, blah. I understand you're looking for some new talent. And now, Mr. Crockett, you understand, I have no amateur background, no professional training, right? Yep, that's what they told me. I go, okay, so what do I need? What would I need to do? He goes, and all he said was, be in my office June 4th with your head shaved bald. I'm like, that's it? He goes, yep, be in my office on that day. I go, all right, see you then. That was it. I mean, it wasn't even a 5-minute phone conversation. It's crazy. Sight unseen. Didn't see any pictures of me, nothing. Called Joe back, told Joe what he said. Joe goes, oh, that's perfect. He goes, when you roll, swing through Atlanta. I'll have a pair of tights and a pair of wrestling boots for you on your way to Charlotte. And that's what I did. And I walked into Jim's office the day he said to be there.
And your first impressions of Ivan?
First impressions of Ivan Koloff, man, I tell you what, you know, I meet Jim Crockett, he takes a look at me, it was kind of funny, he goes, you know, take your shirt off. I'm like, okay, I tell you, that's kind of weird, but okay, I'm thinking to myself, you know, but all right. And, you know, keep in mind, you know, I've been training a year and a half in the gym, 6-8 hours a day for pro football trials. So when I walked into Jim Crockett's office that day, I'm 285 pounds, 8% body fat, 34-inch waist. I mean, I'm pretty stout, and that's what he saw. So he goes, wait here. He walked out, walked back in. He goes, Ivan Koloff, Don Cornotto, take a look at your new partner. And here I'd never even been in a ring, never hit a ring rope. I didn't know who those guys were because, again, I didn't grow up dreaming of being a wrestler or watching wrestling on a regular basis. And so they put me right in the interview set, and they said, hey, you're right off the boat, so you don't speak any English. Stand there, look mean. I want your shirt off. I even put your chains around his neck. And every time they do an interview, just stand there, you know, fold your arms, look mean. I'm like, yeah, I think I can do that. So we finished that up and several hours. And then Jim Crockett said, be in Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow night, you're going to wrestle on television. So, of course, I'm like looking at Ivan and Don going, never been in a ring, how's that going to work? Oh, we'll get there early. We'll get there early. Well, we got there late. And Crockett was not happy. Ivan still talked him into letting me do it. And he gave this simple instruction to Ivan. If he trips on the ropes getting in the ring, he's out of here. He's history. He's done. And so I just focused on that. And so when I look at Ivan Koloff, think back on Ivan, our friendship, Ivan's career in wrestling, stellar career in wrestling. Very grateful and thankful, because if it hadn't been for Don and Ivan those first few months, I mean, these guys, we got to the arenas every night, 2-3 hours early. They bumped all over the ring for me. Ivan would sit in my corner that night in my match. I'd sit in their corner for their World Tag Team match. So I learned the mechanics of wrestling from Don Cornotto and Ivan Koloff on the job. And then they would just talk to me about the old school psychology of wrestling on the way home. So prior to the match, the mechanics. After the match, the psychology. And I couldn't say enough good things about Ivan Koloff and the success of my career. Much of it is certainly attributed to him and Don Cornotto.
And you actually kayfabe not only the fans but also the dressing room, from what I understand, about your ability to speak English, and you played this Russian character. Was it Ivan that suggested that to you, or was it the office?
No, neither. I just, in my mind, I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, and it's like anything I've ever done. When I was 12 years old, I saw a magazine on a stand called Iron Man. And I picked that magazine up. It caught my attention. It was a bodybuilder on the cover. And I started thumbing through the magazine, bought it, and I had a vision for myself one day. Now think about this. So that was age 12. And I thought to myself this: one day I want to look like one of those guys. Keep in mind, at the age of 12, I might have been 100 pounds, you know, soaking wet. Maybe rocks in my pocket, right? And lo and behold, fast forward about 11 years, 12 years, I'm walking into a city I'd never been to, driving into a city I'd never been to before, Charlotte, North Carolina, walking into an office to meet somebody I've only had a 5-minute conversation with. And I went from that, you might say, 100-pound weakling, a dozen years later, to 100 or 285-pound, you know, behemoth, and I had become what I had envisioned at the age of 12. I say that to say that I became passionate about football, and I thought, I'm going to play in the NFL one day, and that became my driving force. And then the door of opportunity opened up for wrestling, and I walked through it, and I thought, with the same intensity and the same passion, if I'm going to do this, then I don't want to just say I'm a wrestler. I want to be a world champion. And so I mentally I thought, let me just project myself into that role. I come to learn, I guess it's called method acting. I didn't go to acting school either. I didn't know any of that. But that's what I did, from what I understand. I projected myself into that role. Got some Russian cassette tapes, learned a little bit of the language, learned how to sign my name in Russian. Did all this on my own. Crockett never asked me to do it. Ivan didn't ask me to do it. I just took it upon myself to do it and thought, this is what I have to do if I'm going to get this character over.
And speaking of acting, I guess you actually almost got the part for Rocky IV. You were one of three people, I guess, you, Kerry Von Erich, and Dolph Lundgren.
We were the three finalists. Kerry was funny. They sent us the script, you know, a good month in advance. And again, Ivan, bless his heart, man, he was awesome. We'd drive up and down the road, man. I'd be memorizing lines for the movie and to him as he would drive and just studying. And I wanted to go out there and just crush it, you know, just kill it. And we get out there on the set, and you know, Kerry looks at me, and I didn't know Kerry well. I'd met him at, you know, a few shows and stuff, and he's like, so like, dude, do you like know your lines? I'm like, hello, they flew us out here to screen test for the final. You know, this is the final screen test between one of the three of us, dude. Like, seriously, true story. It's one of the three of us, and he's like, asked me, do you know the lines? I'm like, do you not? And he's like, oh, I don't know, man. I didn't really like look at him. And I'm like, why are you even here? And so I felt pretty confident. I'm like, well, that narrows it down. 50-50 chance here now. Kerry's out of the picture, I'm pretty certain. And so, of course, I got the short straw. I had to go first, which is fine. But you know, here's the funny about it. I never broke character on the movie set. So to Stallone and his girlfriend and the directors and the limousine drivers and everyone else, I talked in character on the set. And even reading my lines, even casting my lines, right? And we did 3 takes, 2 by myself, and then he said, let's do a third one together. And so we did, and anyone who's ever been on a Hollywood movie set in one of those warehouses, you know, the lighting is you know, it's sketchy intentionally. And I'll never forget, he goes, now halfway through, turn towards me, finish your lines. He goes, turn towards me and let's just have a nose-to-nose stare down. You know, like, you know, if we were in the boxing ring or whatever, right? And so I do that, finish the lines, we're staring at each other, and you know, they yell, cut, and he goes, how was it? And I'll never forget, the director goes, man, it was amazing, incredible, until you turned towards each other, and then we lost you in his shadow. Keep in mind, 285 pounds, Sylvester Stallone, 160, you know, looks much bigger on the silver screen, but a legit 160, so I dwarfed him. And I remember thinking to myself, not good for his ego and not good for my opportunity. And of course, sure enough, Lundgren went after me. I guess they saved Kerry for last. Lundgren went after me, and yeah. And
he wasn't as thick as you. Like, he was tall, but...
He was taller, yeah, he was a couple inches taller than me, but he was about 80 pounds lighter than me. And when the director called me a couple weeks later, he said, Nikita, he said, you did. I mean, you crushed it on as far as delivering the lines and that whole part of it. He goes, you crushed it. He goes, but even for Hollywood, the character, the Rocky character is going to be 35 years old in the movie. It just... your size difference is just too much even for Hollywood. And I go, hey, dude, I get it. I go, thank you, man. I was just humbled really by the opportunity. They were first class, still all of them. They were nothing but first class.
Do you think they realized you were kayfabing then?
I mean, probably. I mean, I thought, you know, Stallone was, you know, he'd been around the wrestling business with Terry Funk, and so probably, well, because when Terry Funk reached out to Don Cornotto, he goes, hey, I know you got this dude over there, like a Russian dude over there. And Don's like, oh, dude, he'd be perfect for that part. And actually, Jim Crockett was not going to let me go screen test for it. Dusty had to talk Jim into doing it. Jimmy's concern was I would get the part. So I, you know, apparently had confidence in me, right? His concern was I would get the part, and then all that time they invested in me on television, you know, they get lost revenue. Dusty said, Jimmy, if he gets the part, dude, no, you'll get quadruple the revenue. Because when he comes back after being a Rocky IV, are you kidding, Jimmy? He'll
Yeah.
He'll do huge business.
Look
so.
what happened to Hogan.
Right, exactly. Yep, same thing. Thunder Lips, right?
But you got to screen test with Stallone, which
Yeah,
is pretty cool.
and it was very, like I said, he was great. He was very personable, and I was just, like I said, just humbled to have the opportunity. It was fun.
Maybe one day we'll be lucky and they'll release the screen test of Kerry Von Erich.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know if he did one. To be honest, I mean, I can't even imagine the dude. He's like, "Do you know your lines?" I'm like, "Yeah," like inside out, backwards, up. You know. Anyway, yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So you were so into this character and you changed your personality so much that I guess when Barry came to Charlotte for the first time, he didn't recognize you?
Well, it's not so much he didn't recognize me because we had reached out to him to come in to be our partner as Crusher Khrushchev. But what's funny is he goes, man, that's when he told me the story. He goes, man, I should have known. They had heard in Louisiana. So even guys, right, who are smart to the business didn't know they thought I was a shoot Russian. I mean, right off the boat, just like the story we were telling. Well, even guys in the business, wrestlers in the business bought into the story, including the guys in Louisiana. So when he came, that's when he told me the story. He goes, man, I mean, he eventually heard it was me, but he's like, man, at first we're like, they got this shooting Russian up in the Carolina, and he goes, I should have known it was you. And he said I should have known it was you because of the intensity that not only I played high school football with, but even practiced. And that old adage that, you know, you play like you practice. So I give 100% in practice. And my teammates, man, they hated me. They did not like me. They're like, dude, chill out. I'm like, no, you play like you practice.
Well, maybe that had something to do with your injuries.
Well, maybe. You know, I didn't get injured in high school. It wasn't until the college days. But yeah, you never know.
And I was reading in your book, there was a death threat incident as well as some fan altercations. Can you talk about some of that stuff?
Yeah, it was crazy. You know, I didn't think much of it back then. Again, my mind is just so focused, right? I remember, for example, Charleston, South Carolina. Ivan and I were going to Charleston, South Carolina one night for a show, and the office informed us that they had received phone calls and death threats that if the Koloffs showed up in Charleston, they were gonna kill us. And Crockett's like, just beef up security, and they had the sheriffs meet us at the county line and escort us to the building, had extra security at the building, and then escorted us out of the building to our cars and back out to the county line. So that was interesting. And then the first time I ever got attacked by a fan in the ring was my match against Ric Flair, my very first ever match against the Nature Boy, Great American Bash, first one ever, 1985. And that's really kind of a crazy story too in this sense. I broke into the wrestling business in June of '84, and in 13 months I'd become World Tag Team Champion, a World Six-Man Champion, and now I'm wrestling Nature Boy Ric Flair in the grand, this massive match called the Great American Bash, first time ever, 25, 30, 35,000 people, main event, and talk about an accelerated path to stardom. It was crazy, and to think about when I think back on it now. But that night, David Crockett was the special referee. Ivan was in the corner ringside with me, and we were well into the match, and Rick's on the mat. He's down. I see David Crockett out of the corner of my eye, and I see Ivan down on outside the ring on the floor, and somebody's got me in a waistlock, and it really caught me off guard. I'm like, it took me a minute, and I'm like, Flair, Crockett, Ivan, who? It's got to be a fan. Oh my gosh! And so then I started, trying trying to reach for the guy. Like if I went this way, he went that way, and if I went this way, he went that way. You know, he was like ducking me. And I'm trying to get it, but he's got me kind of pinned up against the rope, you know, kind of leveraged against the ropes. And at first, I think the cops, you know, they're like, I guess they thought it was part of the act, part of the show. And then at some point, they figured out it's not part of the show. And then they look like the Keystone Cops rolling in trying to get this guy. When they eventually do get him out and the match continues, it's out there. Somebody told me just today, actually. I mean, it's out there somewhere, YouTube or somewhere, WWE Network or something. But and that was the first of a half a dozen attacks, mostly against Flair, but also Magnum TA as well in his hometown, Norfolk, Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So can you just go into more detail about your matches with Flair and what it was like wrestling a big superstar like that at the time?
Yeah, you know, gosh, when I look back at my career, I feel so fortunate. Even the beginning of my career, you know, there were guys in the Mid-Atlantic that, you know, had legendary careers. A guy by the name of Johnny Weaver. He had the famous sleeper hold in the Carolinas, and you know, just Sweet Hansen, Brooke Bernard. I mean, a lot of guys came through there, right? Johnny Valentine, Greg Valentine's dad, and just a lot of big names that were in the Mid-Atlantic. And so for me to come into that territory and without any experience and accelerate the way I did and within just a few months be in the ring with a Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, be in the ring with the American Dream Dusty Rhodes. I mean, the list, you know, you could just, you know, it just kind of staggers my mind when I think about it. And then, like I said, 13 months into the business, I'm wrestling the world heavyweight champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair. And, you know, it was kind of, I guess the word would be, it was surreal at the moment, in the moment of time. And then to go on and work, you know, programs with him that lasted 3, 4, 5 months, again, was really kind of surreal to look back on it, to think about it, especially with the kind of career he's had. But part of the success I've had, I attribute part of the success I had to Nature Boy Ric Flair, to Ricky Steamboat, to Dusty Rhodes, to the Rock and Roll Express, guys who were seasoned in the business and really just furthered my career by teaching me some of the finer points of wrestling. And certainly Rick, I've said many times, Rick could make a broomstick look good. And the joke is, he made me look good. He could make a broomstick look good. He had the ability to get in the ring with anybody. I don't care how bad you were. He'd find a way to make that guy look good. Because he understood, the old psychology of wrestling was, the better you make your opponent look, that when you win, the better you look. And so he didn't have a problem taking a bump from somebody. You know, he didn't have to be 10 foot tall and bulletproof. He didn't have a problem taking a bump from somebody, you know, or really making his opponent shine. You know, obviously depending on what the outcome was. But he did not have a problem doing that because he understood the old school psychology and what really drew people back and what made big money back in those days. So I feel very fortunate to have had, and I don't know how many matches I had. I mean, we worked programs together for, you know, for several years, and probably the only guy in history, perhaps, maybe not, and not a lot of people probably don't know this part of the story, but that turned down the World Heavyweight Championship belt when Rick offered it to me.
That was later on when he was Booker, right?
That was later on, and what had happened, and we'll maybe get a little ahead of ourselves here, but you know, I had a wife that had gotten cancer. She got diagnosed at age 24. She actually died at age 26. I walked away from wrestling to take care of her, and I told him I'd be back. I said, but this is a priority. I have to do this. And after her passing, Rick reached out to me and drove down to his house in Charlotte a couple different times, and he made the offer. You know, come back. I'll put the world heavyweight title on you, and you know, I just mentally, I just wasn't ready, and so the timing just wasn't there for me to do it, and I just said thank you, Rick, but you know, I just have to turn it down. But.
And you had a lot of supporters that were big stars actually, but you discuss it in your book. You had some backstage heat, I guess, because of the big push you got right away. You want to just talk about some of that, because people that aren't in the wrestling business don't necessarily know about the jealousy and the behind the scenes politics that happen backstage.
Yeah, in those days, and I don't know, you know, I don't know what the dressing rooms, the locker rooms are like nowadays, but you know, it was a very professional wrestling has a history of you know, being a very, you might say, backstabbing, cutthroat type of business, because you know, guys are aspiring to be the main event, and if they can cut your legs out from under you, or you know, be able to take your spot on the roster, so to speak, then that's what some of them are going to do. I'm not saying all of them, but certainly some of them. And Ivan was, again, so gracious to me in the early days, because he sensed it. He knew it. He sensed it. If we had one conversation, we had numerous conversations. He was very encouraging to say, look, he called me Nicky. He said, Nicky, look, you didn't, obviously you didn't cut your teeth and put your time in, you know, like some of these guys in small arenas and, you know, with no people in the audience. But you did pay your dues. You know, you paid your dues in the gym. You know, you worked your tail off in the gym, and you catapulted yourself to a certain level. And because of that, this opportunity opened up for you, and you've got the skills and the talent and the ability to take advantage of it. And so don't ever look back. Don't ever, you know. He helped me handle all of that the right way, so that if there was some jealousy or some animosity, that he helped me put it in the right perspective and not let it get under my skin or not let it get to me. And especially when I made the switch from heel to babyface, because I'm certain a lot of those guys, you know, because we billed it as Dusty and a mystery partner. It was really one of the, I think, probably best kept secrets in professional wrestling. You can never do that nowadays with the internet and just all of the exposure of it, social media and everything. But back then, you could for certain count on one hand the number of people that knew who Dusty's mystery partner was going to be that night, prior to that night. So that once I walked out, well, even prior to that, once I walked in that babyface dressing room, and guys were looking around, wondering what's Nikita doing, and you know, because you know there were a lot of arenas had separate dressing rooms back in those days. It was and opposite ends of the building, and so you know it took him a few minutes until Jim Crocker walked in and goes, Nicky. He called me Nicky too. Nicky, you're here. Because the instruction was to show up about an hour after the matches started, and you know, make sure I had a towel on my head and nobody saw me come in the arena, and then come straight to the babyface dressing room, and so boy, I felt like you could cut the air with a knife in that place. It was so thick, you know. I just felt like, anyway, the jealousy and the animosity that particular night, and. But Ivan was so good about that, about helping me with that. So, yeah.
And speaking of wrestlers having animosity against you, you mentioned it a couple of times in your book that you felt Arn may have been saying some stuff. And I don't know if you've seen this in recent years, but in researching this interview, when I search your name, one of the videos that comes up is Arn talking about you. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
On private planes?
Yeah.
Or is that what you're going to refer to?
Yeah.
and he said what?
He said something like you would show up late, and then you would tell the lower card guys to get out of the way so you could sit. And he also said you were a little rough on some of the undercard wrestlers?
Well, I'm not sure if Art has me mixed up with someone else or not. There were times I would get to the plane late, and many times not, or the time not intentional. Like to show up when I want to show up. Wasn't that deal? It was I got hung up in traffic or whatever. So it wasn't never really intentional to be there late. Number one. Number two, I've heard that numerous times, or several times anyway. I don't recall that, and I'm just being as truthful and honest as I can be. I don't recall kicking guys out of seats so that I could sit down. Hey, you're in my seat, whatever. I don't recall that. I'll have to one day maybe have a conversation with him. I did see him recently, and there was a known, there was some jousting, I will say it that way, between him and I. You know, we were never best friends. We didn't run around together outside the ring. I had honestly a lot of respect for Arn and his skills and talents in the ring. I really did. He was very helpful in a number of the matches that we had with each other. He was very, very helpful in helping me learn. But as far as that, I don't know where he came up with that. I'm thinking he's got me mixed up with somebody else, but I guess I'll have to have a conversation with him about that one day.
Well, soon enough, once this interview gets out, there's going to be probably 20 other clips that are going to show up when your name is searched, so that one will luckily not be one of the first that pops up anymore.
You know, I want to tell you this quick. So I did a Legends autograph signing several months ago, and he was there. It was the first time I'd seen him in years. And to this point, I'm trying to be cordial, and man, great to see you, Arn. And he throws, and I don't even remember what he said. Lex was there, J.J. Dillon was there. There are 3 or 4 guys over there, and he throws an immediate joust out like he used to do. In fact, he's the one who nicknamed me Cue Ball, and he nicknamed me Cue Ball, and Tully Blanchard nicknamed me GQ. That was their nicknames for me. And he threw some kind of a joust out, and I'm like really, I'd seen you like 20 years or something, and you're gonna bust my chops. And when I hadn't seen you in 20 years, I'm like, okay. And somehow we got into a conversation about working, and I really wasn't. I promise you, I was not trying to get under his skin. But he said something about working, and I said, yeah, I just made a comment, something like, I feel super fortunate. You know, I said, I work about 4 days a month. And that's legit. I mean, you know, I preach, I minister on weekends, usually Sundays. You know, it might be 5 or 6 days. But the rest of the month, you know, I'm not technically working, you know, on somebody's payroll, right? And when I said that, he goes, see, there you go. He said something to the effect like, see, that's one of the reasons why I hate you. He goes, I get like 4 days off a month. And I'm like, dude, I wasn't meaning anything by it. We were just having dialogue, conversation here, and you know, you get 4 days off a month because you must choose that, you know. So anyway, that was just recent. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like going back to high school, I guess, when you don't see someone for 20 years and they bring something up.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, Art, come on, one time.
Now, there's a funny story in your book that you ran into some trouble when wrestling in Kuwait, where the Russian ambassador wanted you to stay at the embassy thinking you were Russian. Yeah,
well, what happened? So we booked this tour, this 10-day tour to Kuwait, and we're just going to be like in the main city, whatever the main city is. We're just going to be there for 10 days, and it's crazy. We're wrestling in the same stadium every night for 10 days and stay in the same hotel. I'm like, well, pretty easy anyway, but how are they going to get people out anyway? So the promoter, he puts, you know, the obviously posters and all kinds of promotions all over the city and all over, I guess, the country of Kuwait. And of course, I got my CCCP headband, and the hammer and sickle on my tights, and the Russian ambassador in Kuwait sees all this promotion. Well, he reaches out to the promoter and he's like, "Who is this guy? You know, I don't know him. If he's Russian, we want him staying at the embassy while he's here, and if he's not, why is he an imposter? Why is he pretending to be a Russian?" You know. Well, that word got back to the office in Charlotte, and I'm like, oh my gosh! I'm like, now I'm nervous. I'm like, what's gonna happen? And so the promoter tells me, he goes, no. He goes, he's just that's a wrestling character, a wrestling person. Explains the whole thing to him. And the ambassador says, well then, I want you to go around to every poster and black out that. See, he was not happy then that there's a guy pretending to be a Russian. So all that said, so of course we had this big press conference day one that we're there, and I'm nervous that people are going to be like throwing out, like speaking Russian to me, throwing out, you know, reporters throwing out Russian questions. I'm like, so I just kind of sat off in a corner kind of by myself. And then come to find out, this was interesting too. The first night we're in the dressing rooms, and somebody comes in and goes, dude, the Russian ambassador is like in the stands with his wife. I'm like, what? And like, yeah, he's like in the stands. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm booked against Sergeant Slaughter, right? Now I'm, you know, #1 most hated fan polls in America. Slaughter's like, you know, one of the #1 most loved guys, right? I walk out to the ring and the whole crowd cheers me. I'm like, I've been a heel up to this point. I'm like, I don't know what to do, right? Sarge gets in the ring, and of course they all boo him coming out the ring. And I'm like, Sarge, dude, I don't know how to be a babyface. And he was great. He was like, just follow my lead, kid. Just follow my lead. I'm like, okay. So Sarge did. He walked me through that whole match. It was great. I got my hand raised, and all that to say, the Russian ambassador went home happy. He didn't come to the dressing room, so I didn't have to encounter him. But the word came back. He went home happy that night because the Russian Nightmare Nikita Koloff won the match. So, yeah.
Now, I'm friends with Billy Graham, and he told me that there was a story regarding some jewelry store in Kuwait that you guys visited that he said I should ask you about.
Did he really? Did he remember that?
Yeah.
This is... I'm going to tell you this story, but... okay. So, yeah, he and I hung around the whole time together. We worked out together, went to the gym together. He was great. I love Billy. So we decided we're going to go out to the mall one day. Okay? So we get a ride or something out to the mall. And it's crazy. It's not like malls, in America. I mean, let's say there were 40 or 50 stores there. Let's say there were 50 stores in that mall. Well, 40 of them were jewelry stores. I mean, it's Kuwait, right? I mean, and gold was like about, I don't even remember, maybe about 1/4, maybe 1/5, maybe 1/10 the cost of what it was in America, because it's a rich country, right? Right. And so we're walking around all these places, and Billy goes, "Hey, let's see." And the further we walked, the bigger the crowd began to kind of gather all around us. And because we don't understand what they're saying. I mean, in my mind, all I hear is "hakam da hakam da hakam hamada 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 hakam." You know, I'm like, Billy, what are they even saying? He's like, I don't have a clue. And we go into this jewelry store, and you know, we're up looking at this cabinet, and the next thing we know, we're like pinned against the cabinet, and we're like, what the heck? I kind of look at Billy. I mean, we can't really turn. Like, what's going on? So we just kind of like try to edge ourselves around and look, and the place is like wall to wall, like we're like two sardines in a sardine can. And then outside the window of the store is like another 8 or 10 rows of people. And it's in my mind, I thought, this must be what like gorillas feel like when we're all peering at them through the glass, and you know, at a zoo. We felt like we were in a zoo, and then Billy just like he lost it, and he's like, huh. I mean, I don't even remember what he said, but that man, the place like emptied out like a Chinese fire drill, man. Like, you know, these two big guys, yeah, like they were gonna, I don't know, but yeah, it was crazy. But I thought, this is what it must be like, you know, to be an orangutan or a gorilla in a zoo or something. Anyway, yeah, but Billy cleared the place out in a nanosecond.
I'm sure he must have been hilarious in Kuwait.
Oh my God, yeah. No, he was, and him and I would go up. We go up to the rooftop every day, and you know, got to get our tan on, right? So we go up and do our sunning up on the rooftop of the hotel every day, and yeah, great memories with Billy on that tour.
And do you want to go into detail on your feud with Magnum and your thoughts on the very unfortunate accident that happened to him?
You know, when I look at, that's probably the number one most talked about as far as my career and matches, and certainly Great American Bash with Rick, and some of the matches with Dusty, and of course the Road Warriors, the War Games. I mean, there's a lot of fun memories I have. The best of 7 series with Magnum TA, I would have to say is the number one most talked about or brought up by the fans the most. The best of 7 series with Magnum, and you know, the first of its kind ever at the time, and really the whole psychology behind it, the idea of a best of 7, and then the way we did it in terms of a contract signing and his mom there. You know, he never, for those who've never seen that clip, I know it's out there, he didn't smarten his mom up to the wrestling business at all. So she's at this contract signing. He knows what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. She didn't have a clue. And so as we're sitting there and Sandy Scott is kind of negotiating this back and forth, and of course the buzzword, the key word for him is when I call him a mama's boy. What, you some mama's boy? Is that, you know, that's his cue to come flying over the table. And he does. And then we're, you know, kind of, next thing you know, Ivan and I got him down, putting the boots to him. I mean, just, and his mom is like, I mean, she is like beside herself. She's like freaking out. Her mind's all real. And so to set it up that way, and then Bob Geigel to strip him of the title, and then to announce a best of 7 series was, I think, unprecedented at the time. And then to build it the way we did, 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, and then 7th and final match. Once again in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Crockett, to his credit, dedicated the whole entire hour television, because he was going to tape it for television, and it was the whole hour of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. And it couldn't have worked out any better. It wasn't even planned this way, like with the camera angles and everything back then. They weren't as sophisticated as they are now. But to utilize the chain and for it to kind of slither out like a snake right in front of the cameras to where the referee didn't see that a chain was used. I mean, it all just fell into place. And of course the fans, oh my gosh, you want to talk about being livid. You know, here again, a Russian wearing the United States Heavyweight Championship was kind of unheard of, right? The idea of it. And I'm basing this on what fans told me over the years, feedback from fans, right?
Yeah.
And just because of how much they hated me. And then for him to have the accident. And at first I wasn't convinced when Dusty and Jimmy had just come back from a tour in Japan. We were in Philadelphia. I still remember it. So they brought me in a little room, told me he had broke his neck, and it's wrestling, right? It's a work, right? you know, whatever. They go, no, it took them a few minutes to convince me. I'm like, oh my gosh, then kind of settled in. Then they said, well, we've got something else we want to share with you. And then they presented the idea of the Superpower. Well, we weren't calling it the Superpowers that night, but the idea of teaming up with Dusty. And, you know, to take some time, think about it. So they gave me the ultimate decision on it, whether I wanted to do it or not. And again, by fan accounts, that angle was so strong, and the way it was kayfabed from essentially everyone is what got it over even that much more. And I think what really the kind of the ice on the cake or the cherry on top was Bill Apter, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, did two things. One, he did a headshot of me on the magazine cover, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, with like tear coming, I cry for Magnum TA. And then he and I and Dusty did one interview, and that's where we announced the formulation of the Superpowers. And between that interview and that magazine cover and the angle that night, and again in Charlotte, I've had a lot of, wow, my turn happened in Charlotte, number 7, best of 7 happened in Charlotte, the Great American Bash against Flair was in Charlotte. Charlotte's a special place for me.
Now, you mentioned that you were in Japan shortly before that. I think that was kind of an eventful tour, wasn't it? There was an issue, I guess, where you didn't want a job to the Japanese talent, and then didn't something happen with Terry Gordy later on?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was that, because I made 3 tours to Japan, so I'm not certain which. Well, it was my final tour. I just don't know that was my final tour.
You can lump them all together for the purpose of this interview.
Okay. Yeah.
They were all for All Japan, right? They were all for Baba.
Yeah, they were all for Giant Baba. Yep. And I had a lot of bargaining power because of my popularity here, where most of the guys went for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, long trips. I went for 1 week, 2 weeks. And cut the tours short to get back here to the States. And the last tour, Terry Gordy was on the tour with us. I'm thinking Bruiser Brody was on that one too. Actually, I just saw a picture recently. I'm almost positive Bruiser Brody and Terry Gordy were both on that tour. And Mil Mascaras from Mexico, had a great crew. And Terry, you know, I've never been much of a partier. It's just not. When I got into wrestling, my mindset was, it's a business. I'm going to treat it like a business. I got my goals set of when I'm going to be out of the business and all that. So I'm over there, and again, I'm treating it like a business in Japan, just like I am in the U.S. of A. And Terry wants to go out one night, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll go out with you, dude. And you know, and he had a tendency to have a few too many drinks, and he did on that particular night. And we were on the second floor. The bars are different over in Japan. A lot of them. There's you got like the main floor, but then there's like a private floor and different things. So we're up in the private section or whatever, and he just kind of flips out. I mean, he grabs a fire extinguisher, starts spraying it around. He throws it through a window out the second floor and out to the, and he's just doing a bunch of stuff that was very not good. And I'm like, this is not a good thing. And I was able to finally snatch him and say, dude, we are getting out of here. I mean, I'm starting to hear sirens, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going south real quick. I get him out of there. We get back to somehow get back to the hotel, and which is interesting in itself how we managed to do that, but we did. And we get back to the hotel. I go to my room. He goes to his room. I get him in his room. I get him to bed, you know, and I go to my room. Well, 7 o'clock next morning, you know, I hear this, you know, and you know, knock on my door, and I'm like, and I'm not answering. I'm like, well, maybe I just pretend I'm not here, and they knock, and they're saying it's his name's Joe, the senior referee. His name is Joe. He kind of organized, run a lot of the stuff, and I'm like, man, I know what it's about. I'm just gonna blow it off. So I get to the arena that night, and they're like, Nikita, Joe want to talk to you. You know, and I'm like, okay. So I go and talk to Joe and a couple other guys. They're like, last night no good. You tear up bar, Terry Gore, you tear Gordy, tear. I go, and I just looked at him. I go, no. I go, I didn't even have a drink. I go, I didn't tear up any bar. I got Terry out of the bar and got him back to his hotel before more damage was done and more people were embarrassed, and he did more things to embarrass himself. They're like, you pay half damage. And I'm like, no, dude. I'm not paying no damage. I go, just no. Well, they were not happy about that at all. The fact that I wouldn't pay half the damages. Terry had made tons of tours over there, and made tons of tours over there after that, which is crazy too. But I guess I fell out of their good graces because I wouldn't kick in for half of the damages. But it was just, I didn't do it, so I didn't feel right about doing it. So yeah. It was crazy, and because of that, they never invited me back for any more tours.
But it turned out not too bad for you in the long run, anyways.
It did. Now, to their credit, in fact, they cut my tour short, but still paid me the full amount. You know, they're very integrous people, and you know, felt bad, but I just did not feel like I should pay. And it wasn't cheap. I don't know how much damage was done. I don't remember now, but you know, he did thousands of dollars worth of damage. And I'm just like, man, I'm not paying thousands of dollars for something I didn't do. You know, that should come out of Terry's pocket. You know, pure and simple. So anyway.
And you mentioned Brody was on that tour. He's actually receiving an award, the Frank Gotch Award, this weekend. Did you have any contact with Brody?
Not much. I mean, I wasn't around Frank a lot. I mean, you know, the time I was around him, I mean, very cordial guy. I mean, a hard worker, and you know, just had a handful of conversations with him. So I didn't get to, never worked with him in the ring that I recall. I don't believe, but yeah, I'm glad he's getting an award. Well deserved. Well deserved.
And you also wrestled in Puerto Rico, where the unfortunate incident happened with Brody, I guess, for that company prior to the incident. But you did notice the craziness of fans there while you were working in Puerto Rico.
Whew, yeah, and because I went in as a heel against Hercules Ayala, their heavyweight champion, and I just was not a fan favorite, and I did two or three trips over there, and every one was rough. I mean, one of the outdoor stadiums, we literally had, I mean, the people, we were in an enclosed van. I mean, it wasn't even windows on the van other than the windshield. You know, it's an enclosed van to get us into the stadium. I'm talking about the heels now, and people knew, man. They knew who was in that van, and the van could barely. I mean, they'd barely move out of the way for the van to get by. I mean, we had security with AK-47s. I mean, it was to go from the locker room to the ring. They had a cage all the way around, all the way down the walkway. So like, I mean, so people could still throw stuff, but they at least couldn't grab you or get to you. So it's cage all the way down, a cage all the way around the ring. The kids would sell bags of rocks outside the stadium to be able to pummel the heels with, and two different venues. I was walking to the ring one night, and I'm like, oh man, I felt like I got hit with something. The fans were far away, but yeah, I'm like, man, and then I look, and there's blood on my hand. And I look down, and there's a spark plug on the floor. So fortunately, it hit me in the back of the arm, cut my arm open, didn't hit me in the head or something. So I feel fortunate there. Then we were in another arena off by the coast somewhere. I remember the smaller arena. Most of the people were in the second level, and there was only a handful of people around ringside for safety reasons. And I didn't find out till after the match. I never saw it happen, but a little boy sitting in the front row had got his knee cut open. Somebody had thrown an empty whiskey bottle intended for me, but it hit the little boy. And so yeah, I was not a big fan of Puerto Rico.
You were telling us about earlier that you were chosen to be the babyface to form the Superpowers with Dusty Rhodes after Magnum had his accident. What were your thoughts on becoming a babyface initially?
You know, I mean, I don't know if there was apprehension there, because I didn't, just like breaking into wrestling, I mean, I didn't know what it meant to be a babyface or a heel, you know, breaking into the wrestling business. I adapted rather quickly to the heel role of, you know, as far as, especially in those days of not signing autographs, again, not talking to people, even after I started speaking English, comrade. You know, I still made a point of not communicating, talking with people, just to get over the heel character and have people hate me, which they did. And then I guess the most staggering part of it for me is I can still visualize that night when I, you know, the way we illustrated it, letting Dusty go to the ring first, delaying about 30, 45 seconds, maybe a minute before I walk through the curtain behind him, letting him get in the ring, JJ and Ole jumping him, pausing as I get over the barricade, pausing as I step into the cage door, just to build the anticipation of what is going to happen. Oh my gosh. Then stepping through the ropes, tearing across the ring, and tearing into Ole. And just, you know, the old expression, the roof came off the, I mean, the place erupted. And then the 1, 2, 3, and now for the next 10, 15 minutes, Dusty being one of the biggest cheerleaders, people chanting Nikita, Nikita. And then guys who a month earlier in the same arena were letting me know I was #1 in their heart, so to speak, and throwing stuff at me. All of a sudden have their shirts off and they're doing the most muscular that I would sometimes do, and was nothing short of exhilarating. I mean, I was like blown away by how quickly they flipped from hating me, you know, to loving me. And so that experience, I'm glad I had the experience of being a babyface. I don't know that I would have wanted to go my whole career only being a heel and never having had that opportunity.
And you started working with Luger, I guess, at one point during your babyface run. He mentions in his foreword to your book that he didn't like you at first. Obviously, you guys ended up becoming very close. Other wrestlers we've talked to say that he's almost was comically vain at times. What was it like working with him? And I guess you traveled with him at certain points too, so I'm just wondering your thoughts on him.
Yeah, no, it is. My joke is eventually, you know, he and I did become pretty good friends, and I like to say I was one of the few guys who actually liked Lex Luger back in those days. Between he and I and he and Sting, you know, Sting and I were probably the only two guys that really, I would say for the most part, you know, liked Lex. See, and part of the reason a lot of guys didn't like him was had a lot to do with his arrogance. He's very witty, so kind of like Arn, like. To see him and Arn joust was always an entertaining thing in the dressing room because they could really go at it with one another, and are both pretty quick-witted, so you know they could come up with some things. But you know, Lex, to his own admission back then, you know, if he could make a person feel, you know, 2 inches tall, you know, he was going to do that just because he felt he could, and so yeah, I mean you know, I just befriended him. Even when we were working heel and babyface, thought we had, you know, thought we had some good chemistry together, and made for some good matches. And then once we became, you know, friends outside the ring, you know, it just took it to a whole nother level. But yeah. Good chemistry. I thought we had really good chemistry in the ring. You know, big guy against big guy, and you know, it was good.
And you also worked with Sting, and I understand you're friends with him, and I've seen you on Sting's religious show on YouTube there. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about your relationship with Sting?
Very special relationship with Steve. He doesn't, you know, he hasn't allowed a lot of people to get close to him over the years, so he's just a very private person, and I have nothing but total respect for that. And again, I thought we had some good chemistry in the ring, whether we were wrestling against each other or working with one another. I thought we had a very good relationship, for sure, a professional relationship. And then over the years, in fact, after I gave my life to Christ, he was one of the guys in Charlotte, North Carolina that I shared my story with one night before the matches. I had a lengthy opportunity to talk with him, about a half hour. And then it was about 3 years later that I heard he had given his life to Christ. And then we kind of reconnected along the way over the years. And then I have had the opportunity over a number of years to really kind of help him grow in that, mentor and disciple and help him grow in that. And we became so close that I would make several trips. He moved from California out to Texas. His brother actually pioneered a church in Texas. And so I would go out there about once a quarter and spend 2, 3, 4 days with him and his family, and just pour into them, spend quality time with them, and just create really what I feel is a very unique friendship and a very unique bond with Steve, and that still strong to this day. I was just with him just in Maine. I was just with him. So yeah.
Now, when Crockett was taken over by Ted Turner, what were your thoughts on that, and were you at all concerned about your position when it was sold?
No, I mean, what's concerned about my... No, I wasn't. I mean, of course, certainly people were not happy at the fact that it was being... I'd say overall people weren't happy at the fact that it was being sold, or that it had not... that Jimmy wasn't able to keep tighter reins on what was going on. But he just didn't have the right people in place, as far as, you know, if you want to call them bean counters, or the people who handle the money, as far as money coming in and money going out. It grew so large from a mom and pop organization to just exploding when we went on the Superstation on TBS and started traveling all these major markets, and then the purchase of the private planes, and just overextended himself. So people were not, were just not thrilled about that. Certainly with Ted Turner buying it, if I look back on that, it went from being a mom and pop organization that had been owned and operated and run for over 50 years, I think almost 55 years, to becoming a folder in a portfolio. And although Ted Turner had a love for wrestling, It wasn't like he was going to be involved in the day-to-day operation and management of it. So we went in, we stepped into corporate America, and everything changed as far as I was concerned. The dynamics of it changed. I'm reminded of a scene in an old movie called North Dallas 40. And there's a scene in the dressing room with Lyle Alzado with this little short, heavy-set coach drinking his bottles of Malox, and the little coach is saying, "You just need to loosen up and have fun," you know, something like that. And I'll never forget, Alzado said, every time we have fun, you say, "Hey, we need to treat it as a business," and every time we treat it as a business, you tell us we need to loosen up and have fun. Which is it? Which way is it, right? and so I feel like that's kind of where it went when it went to corporate America's format. That it went from just a lot of fun. I mean, we had a great group of guys when in those mid '80s. I mean, great chemistry, great camaraderie. I mean, yeah, there was some jousting and some things that went on back and forth, but overall, when we stepped in the ring, man, we performed, and I think the fans got their money's worth every night. At least that was my goal when I stepped in the ring. I wanted the fan to have their money's worth from the match that Nikita Koloff was involved in, whether it was a single, a tag, a 6-man, an 8-man, war games, whatever it was. So we had incredible camaraderie. And then corporate America steps in. They got guys who are running the organization who knew nothing about wrestling, or had no concept of the business. And then just honestly, I felt like they just were doing things that were just ridiculous, and putting stipulations on things, and you're gonna be fined if you're 1 minute late to the building, and I just thought just stupid stuff personally, and took a lot of the fun out of it. And but I'll say this: so I didn't care for the business outside of the squared circle, all what you would call the politics of it. But when I stepped into the ring from bell time to bell time, I still enjoyed it, because I could be in there performing and giving my best. And so that's my perspective on the transition from family-owned to corporate America.
And I guess the fine for being 1 minute late, that would be under Bill Watts's regime.
He was one of them. Yeah, whether you were late or he tried to. We were in a 6-man tag match in Norfolk, Virginia one time, and myself and I forget. I think it might have been me and Dustin Rhodes, and I know Rick Rude was in the match. As a heel, I forget who all was in the match, but it's a 6-man tag match, and we all got a $1,000 fine. Show up on our check. And so I approached Bill Watts. I go, "What's this all about?" He goes, "Well, it was reported that you were lackadaisical in the ring, lazy in the match that night." I go, "I'd like to dispute that. Who wrote that report?" He said, "Well, Grizzly Smith wrote it." Okay. I go, "I'd like to hear out of Grizzly Smith's mouth that he witnessed me being lazy that night in the ring." And to Bill's credit, you know what? He got all 6 wrestlers together. He brought Grizzly Smith in. And to Grizzly Smith's credit, when Bill asked him, "Grizz, did you witness this match?" Grizz said, "Actually, I didn't. I was in back and someone else told me." And to Bill's credit, he goes, "Okay, fines rescinded. Because he fined each one of us $1,000, and so he gave the $1,000 back to each of us. But I'll say this about Bill: Ivan and I went into his territory when he was running the Mid-South, and I saw, the relationship he had with the wrestlers. And I always remember telling Ivan, I go, the irony is, I go, dude, I could never work for that guy. I just couldn't. I couldn't work for him. And lo and behold, don't you know, he ends up being hired as the boss for WCW, and now I'm working for him. But I had a meeting when he first came in with him, one-on-one. And what I said to Bill was this. I go, Bill, I respect what you've done in the business, and but I want you to know something just right up front. I am here. This is a business for me. It's, you know, I have a college degree. There's other things I can do. I don't have to do professional wrestling. I'm here as a favor, you know, to Dusty and a couple others, but I don't have to do this. And so I just want you to know that up front. And I think I really honestly gained a lot of respect from Bill from that conversation. Because, you know, he had a kind of a tyrant reputation, so to speak, at times. And yet, he and I never had that type of relationship or a conversation that would lead him to be a tyrant to me. And so I really respect Bill for the way he treated me in the wrestling business. And I like to think that conversation gained a lot of respect for each other.
Now, during your hiatus from WCW, when you were dealing with the horrible situation with your first wife, you worked a few shots for Vern Gagne in the AWA. What was it like working for him?
Yeah, I mean, Vern Gagne is an interesting individual, for sure. Now, Greg was, of course, you know, running a lot of the operation, but Vern was there. It was mainly TV tapings, and Vern and Jimmy were doing some co-promotions, like in the Meadowlands in New Jersey and Chicago and different places. And so it was kind of a mutual thing there. So even though it wasn't on the WCW roster, I was doing it really with their good graces with WCW, the NWA, and trying to help Vern keep his company. He just was not too open to change, and unfortunately, I mean, he had some incredible talent in the AWA over the years, and just one by one they were kind of slipping away because he just had such an old school mindset, just not willing to keep up with the times, that it eventually became his demise, and the AWA, you know, just disappeared. And so it was kind of in that time frame where he was still hanging on, still trying to hold on. And so I was coming in to just trying to help, you know, maybe bolster the ratings a little bit, and his TV ratings, and a few shows with a few matches with Larry Zbyszko and some of the other guys. So I mean, yeah, it was a good experience. I mean, I don't have any ill things to say about Vern. I mean, he was just set in his ways the way he was, and of course, you know, I had felt I worked well with Greg, his son, and look back and have, you know, just good memories about doing some shows with the AWA.
Were you a babyface when you were wrestling Zbyszko?
Yeah, Larry was wrestling heel, and yeah, and I was wrestling babyface.
What was his record time for stalling when he was fighting?
Oh my gosh, he was a master at you talk about stalling. My gosh, it'd take him 10 minutes to get his coat off, his ring jacket off. But he was a master at it, though. He really was, and the fans would get so irritated with him. And my hat's off to Larry and how he was able to bring that across. But we had some good matches together.
And when you came back to WCW for the few years there before your retirement, I found one story in your book pretty funny, considering WCW's reputation, where they wanted you to fly to Atlanta on your own dime, and you tried to explain to them, because all the flights were coming out of Atlanta, so I'll let you tell this story.
Yeah, and so, you know, so I took the sabbatical to take care of Mandy, and I went up to what they affectionately called the Ivory Towers, met with Jim Hurd and Jack, I forget Jack's last name. I said, guys, here's what I have. And I just sensed they weren't thrilled about me not putting wrestling as the #1 priority. And you know, even though I had a wife dying of cancer. I said, guys, I'll come back. You have my word, I'll come back. But I've got to do this. I've got to go take care of her. And when I came back, when I eventually did come back, things were never the same. I could just sense their attitude towards me wasn't the same. At one point, they really tried to bury my career. I mean, I was a babyface and lost a cage match to Rick Rude in Minneapolis, Minnesota, my original hometown, right? You know, just right outside of Moscow, Minnesota. But no, but and Ole Anderson was the agent that night, and I'll never forget. I pulled Ole aside. I go, when they gave us the finish, I go, Ole, you've been around the business a long time. He goes, yeah. When's the last time a babyface lost a cage match? I just carried the finishes, you know, I can't get a hold of anyone in the office. I'm not asking you to get a hold of anyone in the office, Ole. I'm a businessman. I'm here to do business. That's not good business. Now, I'm going to do it because I'm a businessman. But that's not good business, Ole. I mean, come on. Really? Seriously? And we don't even have an angle, and he's going over. And so I started getting the picture that they're going to try to, in a sense, kind of bury me. But Ivan and Don and others taught me well enough that even in those situations, how to still keep yourself over with the fans, regardless if the promotion is trying to do that. And then the whole flight, the air tickets. So they said to me, because they wanted all of us to move to Charlotte. I mean, from Charlotte to Atlanta. Well, several of us didn't. Flair didn't move. Arn didn't move. Barbarian didn't move. Ricky Steve, myself. Several. There's 8 or 10. Jimmy Garvin didn't move. And they're like, okay, well, you don't want to move, that's fine, but all of your airline tickets will be to and from Atlanta. Like, okay, so they'd send me my tickets, and that was back in the days when they actually were worth something. You know, it wasn't the whole non-refundable and all that kind of stuff. They were full fare, and you know, and I would get the tickets, and Atlanta to Cincinnati, Cincinnati to Atlanta, and I'd look at the ticket price, and I'd call the airline. I'd say, hey, how much is it from Charlotte to Cincinnati and Cincinnati to Charlotte? And sometimes it'd be $100 less, sometimes it'd be $200 less, and depending on where the ticket was going. And I'm like, that makes no sense. I mean, they're wasting money. And I had those conversations with them. And I said, look, you're sending me a ticket for $350 from Atlanta to Cincinnati, for example, and I can get it from Charlotte for $225. I mean, I saved the office $125. You know what the response was? Oh well, we're not changing it. It's insane. That's stupid. So I would go to the airport. I'd change the reservation, change the ticket, go to the airport, and they'd hand me $125 cash refund. The airline would. So I started making, and I'm not exaggerating this, I started making thousands of dollars in airline refunds because they refused to give me tickets flying out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm like, all right. It was probably one of the reasons WCW no longer exists. But I tried to do the right thing. I want people to understand. I tried to do the right thing. I wasn't hiding it from them. I told them up front, guys, I can save the office money. Just give me tickets out of Charlotte. They're like, nope. I'm like, all right. So that was some of the stuff they were doing.
Yeah, because you're not going to waste your own time and not get the refunded money when you can get the money and save time for your family.
No, absolutely not.
So do you want to talk about the incident with Vader? And I was actually surprised because we talked to Vader, and because it says on the internet, which we I think discussed a bit off camera, the internet exaggerates things, and it said Vader ended your career. And basically when we talked to Vader, Vader said no, he had the option and he could have kept wrestling, but he also had an injury and an insurance policy. And you were saying a similar thing in your book, so do you want to tell us the story on that?
Yeah, and I think part of, again, WCW tried to capitalize, I guess you'd say, on my decision to walk away. Again, not happy that I walked away. So to capitalize on that, I think WCW was promoting Van Vader ended Nikita Koloff's career, right? So that's kind of, I think, how it got out there into the wrestling world. And truth of the matter is, my last match was against Van Vader, and he did injure my neck that night, and I didn't know till the next day, but I got a hernia, lifting him up, 500-pound guy lifting him up. So I got a hernia, so I injured my neck, I got a hernia, I had to have surgery for my hernia, and went through a series of tests for my neck, and you know, everything from a chiropractor to an MRI, neurosurgeon, and they say you're 33 years old, you got the neck of a 55-year-old man with bone spring, arthritis, and a deteriorating disc in your neck from you know, all your pile drivers and suplexes and everything, whatever else, right? And the longer you keep going, the higher risk of something more permanent. And we're not saying there will be permanent damage, but you risk that. And so I'm 33, it's Thanksgiving, I got injured right before Thanksgiving, I'm home for Thanksgiving, I'm home for Christmas, I'm home for New Year's. I had the surgery for my hernia, I'm rehabilitating my neck, you know, I'm getting ready to turn 34, and my goal, what I set and determined when the day I broke into wrestling, was that I'd be retired from active wrestling by the time I was 35. So I'm like, I go back for what, a year, 9 months, and what's the point of that? So I just made a calculated decision and walked away under my own terms, and informed the office. But of course, there, you know, there wasn't going to be any hoopla over there's going to be no retirement party or celebration for Nikita's retirement, which is fine. You know, they sent me a termination letter that I breached, you know, my contract, and that they were terminating my contract, etc., etc. I'm like, that's fine. And you know, I knew I was done anyway, and I had no intention of going back. And so that's the actual story. So Vader is correct. You know, I had an option. I had an option of going back. I mean, I could have went back, but I just made a decision. Time to bronze the boots.
And you had the same Lloyds of London policy that Animal had. I think he took a break from wrestling for a while. Kurt Hennig took a break. I think Rick Rude even had that. That's why he was only managing towards the end.
Yeah, so what happened is Tim Peltier, I hired my best friend. He's still my best friend. Tim and I met. He was our quarterback in high school. He actually played with Kurt and Rick and all the guys. Tim did. He was our quarterback in high school. He and I became friends in 1975. Still a friend to this day. Then Tim went on to the junior college. So then Tim and I got to play junior college ball together. We were gonna go play four-year college ball, but he separated his throwing arm. I mean, he was being looked at by some pretty major colleges, Oklahoma Sooners. I mean, he was a wishbone. We ran a wishbone style back then, and he was an incredible wishbone quarterback and had a great arm. But when he separated that shoulder, it put him out of football. And but we remained friends. I think in those days I was the first ever to hire what you would probably call a personal manager. And by that meaning, Tim, I'm going to hire you, pay you a percentage of my annual salary, and you do everything for me, including paying my phone bill, my electric bill, my rent, all my checks are going to be mailed to you, right from Jim Crockett Promotions, right from Ted Turner, directly to your house in Minneapolis. You control everything. Give me a little stipend every week, so you know, if I need to buy something or whatever, I can do that. You know, buy some food, groceries, different things. So he did that. And Tim did a phenomenal job for me. I mean, it was incredible. He hired a CPA firm, an attorney firm, you know, he surrounded an investment firm. He surrounded himself with all these people smarter than him, and then he just managed it all, and then managed me. What eventually happened is, I think Animal was the second one. You know, Joe being, again, we were like brothers, you know, prodigal son to the family, and so we became like so close and like brothers. So he hired Tim. I think he was Tim's second client, and then eventually and then Rick heard about it, and Kurt, and Big Boss Man was a client of Tim's at one point. Tim had about 8 or 9, I mean, marquee name guys that he was handling all of their investments and monies and everything else. And so Tim was the one who's instrumental in initially getting the Lloyd's of London, and then eventually got all of the guys on policies. And so credit to Tim Peltier, man. He is kudos to Tim. He's a brilliant guy.
Now, everyone always talks about how great you would have done in WWE, fighting Hulk Hogan. All of your buddies had good runs in WWE. You talk about it in your book, so I know the answer why you never went to WWE, but you want to explain it to us?
Yeah, I mean, you know, certainly looking back, you know, the magazines made a big deal out of it. WrestleMania, what would happen if, you know, Nikita Koloff, Hulk Hogan. I mean, and certainly other guys, you know, Macho Man and others. I'm sure it could have had some, you know, I feel like some great matches with. I had, you might say, I have this sense of loyalty to a fault. You might say, you know. Years later, I'm still a Minnesota Vikings fan. I'm still a Minnesota Twins fan. I wore my hat, I think, in here tonight, and so because Jim Crockett gave me the break he did. I mean, look, when I look back on it, I think it'd be a toss-up to say they take somebody off the street today and throw him in a TV match, never having been in a ring before, but try to make him somebody, not squash him, but try to make him somebody. So it's I feel a very unique story, and so I had a very, I was very grateful to Jim Crockett for opening that door and giving me that opportunity, and yes, as Ivan and others have said, Don Cornell and others, look. But you still had to go in and do it. Even though Jim opened the door, you still had to go in and perform. You still had to go, and you did it. Don will still say to me this day, I just can't believe we just threw you in the ring like that. He goes, but you did it. You pulled it off. You did it. And so I had a real sense of loyalty to Jim. And looking back, you know, the old adage is, the old saying is, hindsight's 20/20, right? Well, you know, even when Jim started putting guaranteed contracts out there, I mean, I could have probably could have leveraged the WWF with Jim, certainly for double the money that I agreed to work for him for, maybe even triple or quadruple. We'll never know, right? But I feel pretty confident to say I could have leveraged that and made the jump to WWF, and perhaps made more money. You know, certainly their marketing was 100 times better than Jim Crockett's marketing when it came to outside the ring. You know, so I didn't make anywhere near the money potentially that I maybe could have, but I have no regrets in staying with Jim and staying with NWA and eventually with WCW whatsoever. I'll just look back on it with fond memories. And my hat will always go off to Jim Crockett for giving me that opportunity.
Now, Ivan Koloff passed away a couple years ago now. I'm not sure if it had something to do with hepatitis or not, because I know it was related to liver cancer, and he needed some treatments, I guess, that he couldn't afford just before he passed. I remember reading about that. What are your thoughts on his passing? And it was kind of sad. He didn't have much at the time.
Yeah, Ivan lived, I mean, he lived a full life. I mean, he had a stellar career in professional wrestling. And you know, when I talked to him only a couple weeks prior to his passing, and he had shared with me, and I knew his physical struggles. I mean, he was a wreck from head to toe. I mean, by a wreck meaning, I mean, from separated shoulders to busted ankles to, you know, blown out knees. I mean, he gave everything he had to the wrestling business. I mean, if anybody ever did, Ivan Koloff was one who lived, ate, and breathed it, loved the wrestling business, gave his heart to wrestling, really. And so I knew the last number of years he had a lot of physical struggles, just to get out of bed and get going in the morning. But man, he was a machine to the end, right to the end. He was a machine, and wouldn't complain. At least never complained around me, never complained to me. Just amazing. And I guess the highlight for me is after I left wrestling, having given my life to Jesus and reaching out to Ivan and inviting him to a church service in 1995 and witnessing him at an altar, and it was a real life change. And by that I mean it wasn't some religious thing, that experience that he encountered. He encountered real life change because by his own testimony, he went from being a drug addict and an alcoholic and addicted to tobacco and just a host of things. And on that night that I witnessed, I was there. I mean, it was like the slate, the whiteboard was wiped clean, and he got a brand new start. And then to watch him live the last 20 or so years of his life with a different perspective on life, still loving wrestling, but having a real love for the Lord and mincing no words in anywhere he went, whether it was an autograph signing in a Walmart store or wherever. He always had his Bible with him. And so right up to the end, there was just a peace about him that really gives a peace in my heart, even though it's sad of his passing. And I was fortunate, invited by his wife to speak. It was a very private memorial that they had for him. And she had invited me and asked me, and I made a point of rearranging my schedule because I wanted to be there to speak at his memorial, and just had nothing but just such fond memories for Ivan.
And Curt Hennig, of course, passed away not too long ago, maybe a decade or so ago. You knew him from high school and from wrestling a bit. Want to say anything about him?
Well, again, we made a reference to it earlier, right? Brady Boone, Tom Zink, Rick Rude, and Curt Hennig, all from the 1976 graduating class that are no longer living. And that really broke my heart to hear that, because hear of Kurt's passing, really all of them. I mean, and Curt, you know, I knew Kurt's wife, Lenise, from high school. She was her and her sister were high school cheerleaders. I think Lenise and Lene. I think, and one graduated. Lenise graduated with Curt, and her sister graduated in our graduating class. Two beautiful young cheerleader. Everyone was in love with the. I think Leonards were their last name. Everyone was in love with the Leonard girls, you know. And Curt was fortunate enough to marry one of them, and then have 5 amazing children with her. So my heart really went out to her when I heard the news that Curt had passed. Rick, you know, the way he was found, I've since met. I think I've met his son in Rome, Georgia, and was pleased to hear that prior to Rick's passing that he began to reach out to a pastor of a local church there who really ministered to Rick. And so I had a piece about Rick's passing, and yeah, just kind of heartbreaking to look back and go, man, I went to school with all these guys, and none of them are around anymore. So.
And then, of course, I got to ask you about Dusty, who played a big role in your career, and he's gone too, unfortunately.
He is, and you know, one more thing about Ivan, you know, and you know the liver, you know, his liver failure. You know, part of that, you know, and Ivan wasn't shy about, you know, telling, you know, sharing all the ways he felt like he screwed up over the years. He knows towards the end that a lot of his drinking and drugs had a lot to do, even though he cleaned his life up, you know, like I said, in 1995. Prior to 1995, he lived a pretty rough life, pretty rugged life, and he wasn't shy about sharing that and knowing how detrimental a lot of that was to his health. You know, let's face it, I mean, the body can only sustain so much abuse, right? Whether it's drugs, alcohol, tobacco, or anything else. And so that certainly led to you know, what some might say is a premature death for Ivan. He was in early 70s. And Dusty, man, there's some great memories with Dusty. And again, when you're a booker, you're not the fan favorite when it comes to the dressing room a lot of times. And when I think about the opportunity to become his partner, become the Superpowers, again, much like Jim, I'm very grateful that they thought enough of me and my ability to be able to, again, pull that off, of being a Russian babyface, right? Who at the time was voted #1 most hated in wrestling, and then became essentially #1 fan favorite. 1987, I think, right? Inspirational Wrestler of the Year, and man, Dusty and I had so much fun. I was just telling one of my daughters recently. We were talking. Dusty's name came up, and we were talking about how he and I used to fly on the planes together, and we get back in those days a USA Today, and we go right to the want ads, and we go to the land for sale section, and man, we always talk about him and I going in together and buying, whether it was land in Montana or Colorado or Idaho, so like buying, you know, several hundred acres ranch or something, just splitting it up or whatever, and you know, with running brooks and wildlife running on, you know, snow-capped mountains in the background, and we were dreaming, man. You know, the Russian nightmare and the American dream. we were dreaming. We were dreaming. We're like, man, we got to do that one day, you know. And we never did. Unfortunately, we never pulled the trigger. We never bought any product, although we talked about it for many conversations. We drive up and down. If we weren't on private planes, we were driving together. And what's funny is, I say it's funny, Dusty drove most of the time. Now he's the booker, but he had his, you know, red convertible Mercedes. He, let me drive, baby, let me drive. I'm gonna drive, baby. Maybe they just didn't trust me behind the wheel. I don't know. That might have been part of it. Now that I think about it, right? But I had a gold convertible Corvette that I still have to this day, 32 years later. And he had a convertible red Mercedes, but he'd drive most of the time, and we had such great camaraderie, just laughing and talking in the car, and again, just dreaming on the way to matches and the way home, and he helped me a couple times, kind of set the record straight with some, what I felt were some shady promoters, and he pulled me, the kid, let me tell you a story, kid. So he was always telling me stories, you know, and was so grateful for that he would share those stories. And I drove to Atlanta one time. This is when he had his wrestling school in Marietta. And I'd written my first book called Breaking the Chains, A Handbook to Christian Living. And I felt like I was supposed to give him a copy of it. And I called him up one day. I said, Dustin, come down, take you to lunch. He's like, okay, baby, yeah, we'll go to lunch. So I drove to Atlanta, drove 4 hours from Charlotte to Atlanta. We were out at lunch. He goes, what are you doing in town, baby? I said, I'd come take you to lunch. He goes, no, yeah, I know that, but you know, what else are you doing in town? And I'm like, I'm taking you to lunch. He goes, what are you doing after lunch? I thought I'm going back to Charlotte. He goes, wait a minute, baby. So you drove all the way down here from Charlotte to take me to lunch and you go back home? I'm like, yeah. He goes, why would you do that? I go, you know what? I go, I love you, Dusty. And I feel I wrote this first book. I feel I'm supposed to give you a copy of it, you know. And so I had already signed it to him and personalized it and gave him a hug when I left and told him I loved him. And I had a buddy of mine who was in his school at the time. He called me later that night. He goes, when you left, he goes, Dusty went in his office. He was in there for 2 hours. Like he read your book from cover to cover. And it just, you know, just really touched a special place in my heart. And so to look back on my time that I got to spend with Dusty is special. And he was very helpful and instrumental in the early part of my career. When he came into the territory, you know, we started doing some arm wrestling things in the ring and, you know, some of that. And encouraging me and coaching me on the art of professional wrestling. And so very special place in my heart for Dusty. Always will be. Always will be.
And why is it that numerous professional wrestlers have gone on to preach after their wrestling careers?
You know, here's what, based on some of the stories and conversations that I've had, is there's this tendency, whether it's professional wrestling or professional football or corporate America or really anything else, the way it's been described to me, and Lex Luger would be another example of that. April 23rd, 2006, you know, he had his aha moment, you know, after numerous stints in jail and down towards the end, lots of the path of drugs and drinking and alcohol. There's only so much success you can have. You know, he likes to say, you know, he had all the baubles and trinkets and all the fame and fortune and money and women and everything else. But, you know, there's a conclusion that those of us who've made that decision is that something's still missing. I mean, there's still the, you know, a void there, and all the other things might temporarily fill that void. But I think they, based on what they've told me and what I know from my own experiences, you know, I achieved this level of success, this pinnacle of success, but yet there's no significance. There's no significance that comes from that. And so I think what a number of these guys have done, based on what they've told me and based on my own experiences, we've had the success. You know, the roar of the crowd is thrilling in the moment, but the roar of the crowd ends, and then you got to look for the next thrill to fill that void or that emptiness. And what they have all concluded, and what I concluded in October of 1993, was in order to move from success to significance or success to fulfillment, it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is what we've concluded as a group, and so that would be my answer to that. That, you know, guys people can climb the corporate ladder, or they can have success in all these different arenas, but the conclusion, all my friends that have followed that same path that I have followed, all conclude the same thing. That it still leaves them empty inside. It's like an empty chasing after the wind, Lex calls it. And the only thing that brings fulfillment, or we found that brought fulfillment, was that relationship with Jesus Christ. So
are you preaching somewhere, the same place every Sunday, or do you travel around to various churches?
So I've been, the last 20 years, I've been predominantly an evangelist, where I travel. I've been in approximately 1,500 churches to date in 28 different countries. Everything from crusades in the island of Zanzibar off the coast of Africa to the biggest audience, actually Lex and I spoke in Jamaica to an audience of over 73,000 and shared our testimonies, shared our stories. That's the main thing that I do is evangelism. I recently did a short-term interim pastoring at a local church in North Carolina to kind of help them out in between pastors. That was my first time actually pastoring a church on a regular basis. Most of the time, like I'll speak this Sunday evening here in Waterloo, Iowa, after the Hall of Fame at a local church here, and so the audiences vary. It can be a men's dinner, it can be a men's breakfast, it can be a Sunday morning service, it could be a crusade on an island. It just depends. We've done wrestling, believe it or not. We've taken professional wrestling and combined that with the gospel message, and how we've done that is had an actual wrestling event, a wrestling show, and then had guys in to share their story and their testimony. There's a scripture in the Bible says, in Ephesians says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And so we kind of utilize that scripture and say, hey, tonight you're seeing wrestling man against man, right? Mano y mano. But the scripture says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. You know, we wrestle against principalities and, you know, wicked and evil forces is who each of us wrestles against. So we've actually taken wrestling and combined that with the gospel message. And over the years, as Lex and Sting and Ted DiBiase and Animal and others have been involved in some of those events with us, we've literally seen Sting and DiBiase and I did an event in Indianapolis, to give you a quick example. Back when they had the Dome in Indianapolis, there were 43,000 teenagers at that event. We did an illustrated sermon, if you will. It was kind of depicting Sting's life story. DiBiase and I played the heels. Sting was the baby face. And at the conclusion of the three of us sharing our stories, we saw over 10,000 youth, 10,000 young people that got out of their seat and came forward and said they wanted to give their life to Jesus Christ. So we've seen the crazy business of professional wrestling used really to bring God glory, so which has been amazing. Never would have thought it in a million years that you could go combine those two things together, but we've been able to do it. So.
Right, because in the real professional wrestling, I don't think God has much of a place in it.
Well, overall, I would have to agree with you. And what's interesting is, though, too, wrestling goes way back. When you read the Old Testament, it depicts a story of Jacob wrestling an angel. So literally talking about wrestling in way back in the Old Testament. And yeah, it's just interesting because when you look at wrestling in the old days anyway, when you had just kind of like what we would call a white meat baby face, right? A true baby face. And then you had the heel, the bad guy. So you had essentially good versus evil, right? The fan would cheer the good guy and boo the bad guy. And even an illustration there is that's kind of like life, right? There's good and there's evil. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And so wrestling kind of actually depicts that and helps illustrate the gospel in a sense. So interesting.
I just mean the outside of the ring antics of wrestlers and the politics and the back. There's not much integrity in it, I don't find.
I agree. And again, I'm not around it a lot at this point other than, you know, autograph signings and those sorts of things. But if I speak to the era in which I wrestled in, yes, and myself included. Look, if the name Jesus was mentioned in the wrestling circles I ran in, it wasn't in a favorable manner at all. You know, there was a couple guys, George South, if you're familiar with that name. George was well known, you know, to be to be a Christ follower back in those days, but to my knowledge, he was it. I didn't know anyone else that at least professed to be following Christ. And certainly, as we mentioned, if God or Jesus were mentioned, it was not in a very favorable way. That's right.
And I understand you marry people as well.
I did some. Ivan was actually became an ordained minister and was married people all the time. I have married a couple of people. Not something that I really I do a lot of, but I have in the past. Yeah.
So I noticed you don't have a lot of social media. You're pretty hard to track down, unless maybe you do, and I was just not able to find it. But if someone wants you to speak at their church or book you for a wrestling event or anything like that, where can they do that?
Well, they can certainly, of course, they can direct email me, Nikita with the letter S as in Sam, Koloff at Gmail is probably the best way to direct message me that way. I do more Instagram and Twitter because it's just kind of quick. Facebook, I have a Facebook presence. I don't really get on Facebook. I actually have someone kind of watches it for me, only because it became very, as you might get, very time consuming. And so I just kind of pulled away from Facebook. So I do have a presence there. I rarely ever check that, but they can find me on Instagram. Mine is Nikita Koloff with a #1 behind it. There's a lot of out there on Instagram and Twitter, but Nikita Koloff with the #1 behind it is the legit me. So of course, they can direct message me there on Twitter or Instagram, or just directly shoot me an email. And I do a lot of, I still do a lot of, in fact, I just prior to my interview with you, I was on the phone with a promoter lining up an autograph signing in Georgia later this year. And so I try to be very selective with that, just like even these types of interviews, I try to be very selective, only because I think it's best for the fan and best for the promoter if I'm not out there every single weekend making myself available. To me, it'll mean more for the fan. It'll mean more in the promoter's pocket, and I just don't want to be out there every single weekend. I love the fans, but my heart would be if I could be in a church every weekend. You know, that would be #1 priority. So. And
finally, what advice would you have for someone, maybe even just a young person or anyone that has demons and is trying to conquer them as a preacher? What do you tell them to try and help them?
Well, I mean, kind of the bottom line is anyone struggles in life. I mean, life is a struggle in and of itself. We know that. Whether you're you know, have a relationship with Jesus or not, my view on it is this. We're all going to struggle. In this life, you're going to have trouble. In this life, you're going to have trials and tribulations. It's just the reality of life. Nobody's going to skate through this life without some sort of tragedy, without something, whether than personally, a family member. It's just not going to happen. The solace for me, the peace in my heart is, and the reason I made a decision to surrender my life to Jesus is I felt that now I've got somebody who, as the Bible says, he'll stick closer than a brother. He'll never leave me, never forsake me. So I don't have to walk this journey alone. And for that person who maybe has never made that decision, my encouragement would be, if you've never considered that, to consider that. Consider taking your hands off the wheel. There's a song, I think a country western song, Jesus Take the Wheel, I think is the title of the song, or at least the lyrics of the song, meaning I've tried to steer this thing long enough, you know, whether it's the wheel of a car or the wheel of a ship, right? Man, let me take my hands off the wheel. Jesus, you take the wheel, and let me just turn my life over to you and help me navigate this thing. You're going to be, you say you're going to be there with me every step of the way. No guarantee it's going to be a bed of roses or a sea made of glass. But no matter how rough the sea might get or how challenging life might be, I've got you to lean on, because you're going to be there closer than any brother would be to me. So regardless whether it's an addiction or whatever it is, that would be my encouragement. If you've never considered just surrendering it all to Him, to do that and go, okay, I'm gonna do that. And if for somebody wanted to learn more about that, go to nikitakoloff.com and click on the icon that says free gift. You click that on, and there's a very understanding explanation of what that looks like to have a relationship. And I emphasize that over religion. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about having a personal relationship, like you would with a spouse or a child, or like I have with my best friend Tim Peltier. That's what I'm talking about.
And is there anything you want to say to your fans that have watched this for the past 2 hours to close this off?
Yes. You know what? I'll say it again and again and again and again and again. As far as I'm concerned, the wrestling fans are the best fans on the planet. Remember I mentioned I'm a Minnesota Twin fan, a Minnesota Viking football fan. I mean, I like football, I like baseball, I like all sports and in general. But a lot of the different sports, I see a lot of fickle fans. I don't see that with wrestling. I see a lot of fans who are dedicated, committed, supportive of all of us as wrestlers. I feel like I learned from a very early time in wrestling that you're the one who put butter on my bread and bread on my table, and to that I'm very grateful and thankful for all of your continued loyal support. And as I travel around the nation, travel around the world, and meet many of you, I love hearing your stories of what kind of impact that I made on your life, whether it was inspiring you to lift weights, or inspiring you to go to church, or whatever inspiration I've brought you. That thrills my heart. I'm incredibly humbled by that, and look forward to meeting. If I haven't met you yet, I look forward to one day meeting you, and if not signing an autograph, be able to take a picture with you, or shake your hand, or say a prayer with you, like I already done with some of the people here in Waterloo tonight. One last quick story. A man came up to me. He was at a Legends autograph signing in Fayetteville, North Carolina, about 15 plus years ago. And he said, I got to tell you this story. I said, okay. He said, you were there, Tully Blanchard was there, Ivan Koloff was there. And you guys did a church service as a part of the Legends. He goes, and I went, because I was a big fan of all three of you. He goes, you gave an altar call. He goes, and I went forward and gave my life to Jesus. And all these years later, I'm still walking with Jesus. And he got very emotional tonight. And he said, I just want to say thank you for having that church service, at that autograph signing. It changed my life forever. And so I'm thankful and grateful for all of you fans. I look forward to meeting you one day, hopefully. If not in this life, in the life to come.